Welcome to the Riveo Impact Lab, the podcast in which we explore what it means for small businesses to have real impact in an evolving world. On this podcast, we engage our curiosity around topics like sustainability, diversity and inclusion, and the ethical outcomes of our decisions, all from a small business perspective.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily.
And I'm Ellen. Today we are excited to share this episode with you. As a reminder, we release episodes on the second Thursday of every month, so you can catch us wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube, Spotify, or any other podcast platform. And you can support us by listening, sharing, or leaving us a review.
Today's episode is really exciting. So I had the opportunity to speak with Mick Ebeling, the founder and CEO of Not Impossible Labs. In their own words, Not Impossible is an innovation studio that produces content, technology, programming, activations, and partnerships that demonstrate the capacity of mankind to make the impossible not impossible. Mick is actually a highly sought after speaker, so we were really lucky to get some time with him. And he's also the world's only 3-time recipient of Time Magazine's Best Inventions of the Year. He has a lot of accolades, a lot of awards, but this particular one really caught my attention and I thought was really interesting. He's just gained so much recognition for his humanitarian work. And Ellen, you actually were the one who got us in touch with Mick and the team at Not Impossible. How did you originally come across their team?
I was at a conference and saw Mick speak. And from the moment he started telling his story, I was just enraptured by the whole thing. He has a background in video production and storytelling, and they really use that to promote their cause. But their cause is so interesting because they take these problems that the world has that everyone says are impossible, like say world hunger or, something like that. And they approach those problems in an innovative way that is so interesting and makes a huge impact. So I just loved it. I wanted to get him on our podcast. And we are, like you said, very fortunate that we were able to do that.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you connected us to Mick and his team because he has a lot of really interesting perspectives to share based on the work that he's done and the work that he's continuing to do. And I think in the times that we're living in, we really all could use a bit of inspiration and motivation on solving these, quote unquote, impossible problems. And this episode is sure to provide that inspiration to everyone. So with all that being said, please enjoy our conversation with Mick Ebeling. Wonderful. Well, I am excited to welcome author, speaker, innovator, philanthropist, humanitarian, and founder of Not Impossible Labs, Mick Ebeling, to the Riveo Impact Lab podcast. Welcome, Mick.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I was thinking about how to start this conversation as I was looking through your body of work, and it's a little bit difficult to know the best place to start because both you and Not Impossible have such a wide reach. But let's just start at sort of the core of what it is that you're doing with Not Impossible. So if you were just newly introducing yourself to someone, telling them what Not Impossible Labs does, how would you express what that is?
I would say, I always use if I met you at a party and you said, "Oh, what do you do?" I would say that we are a innovation studio, and the things that we innovate, the things that we create, the things that we make are things that help to solve social issues, that address things that we see as problematic. We call them absurdities in society. And then people would say, well, what does that mean? And then I would say, the best way to define who we are and what we do is to talk about the things that we've made. So I would say we created a low-cost ocular recognition device for a paralyzed artist to draw again for the first time using only their eyes. And we did it for less than $100, made of cheap sunglasses, coat hangers, duct tape, zip ties. And that was our first kind of aha moment when we did that. And we saw how wildly successful it was because we didn't do it intentionally. We did it as just a side project, as it's kind of a little goof on the side, and it went so big that it made us want to keep doing it more. And so we then went out and created the world's first 3D printing prosthetic lab and a refugee camp. We've created, and then that's usually at the time of the party where people go, "Whoa, my gosh, that's crazy!" And then I was like, "Yeah, I know." And it wasn't intentional. It was completely serendipitous. There wasn't, it took a couple times before we realized, wow, we're actually pretty good at this. We should keep doing this. And that was essentially what led to the birth of Not Impossible Labs.
That's an incredible story. And I can imagine it's the kind of party story people actually enjoy hearing because there's so many cool facets of that. And I did watch the video about the person that was able to then do the graffiti art again with just his eyes. I mean, that is incredible. I had no idea it was only $100. That's a really interesting part of that story. But that is so cool. And you mentioned this briefly, but I've seen that you've talked about addressing societal absurdities, and that is a really interesting phrase. So can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by absurdity in this context?
Yeah, I think that adults have a really high propensity to try to create things that are overly complicated when they're describing things. Absurdities are things that you see when you look at the world, when you look at your towns, you look at life, and you're like, that's ridiculous. Why does the world work that way? And for us, that many times is when you see things, and going back to the examples that we just stated, the eye rider was a reaction to the absurdity that there was an artist who lived 13 miles from where I'm sitting right now in downtown Los Angeles, which, by the way, has a GMP greater than most developing nations. Los Angeles does. And this guy couldn't talk to his father and brother because they didn't have the right amount of money, have the right amount of insurance. Yet there was other people in the same hospital with total paralysis, and they were able to communicate. That's absurd. That doesn't make any sense. It's not right that a father and a son can't talk to their brother, to their son, because they didn't make the right amount of money, they didn't have the right amount of insurance. That's stupid. That's absurd. So that for us is what we do, is when we see things in the world and we say, that doesn't make sense. We have a project that we're working on right now that is a reaction to the fact that there's 50 million people in this country, in the United States, who don't have food security. They don't have 2-3 meals a day. Yet those people are not homeless. They're working multiple jobs. They're leaving multiple families to a household. They're trying, they're grinding, they're out there, they're trying to get it done. And they can't feed their families, and they can't feed themselves. That's absurd. That's ridiculous. That it's a little bit of inciting a little bit of disgust and anger in you when you kind of you put that realization together and you say, I'm not gonna sit by and just let that happen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, because I think, most of us have felt that when we see something like what you're describing, like these kids and adults that are experiencing this food insecurity, and you feel that disgust and that anger, but then it sort of stops there. So with Not Impossible, you are taking that next step and saying, we're not just going to leave it at that feeling, but actually move and do something about it. So not everybody takes that step. So I'm kind of curious what it is about the idea of closing that gap between what people need and the seeming, impossibility of having those needs met that sort of captured your heart and attention and got you invested in the work of it.
I don't, I just feel like it's a hard thing to pinpoint. I believe that there's people who do shit and there's people who comment on shit, or they're pundits and there's doers. And I feel like there's too many people in this world who love to comment and love to talk about and be pundits. And there's not enough people in the world who actually do things. And I'm talking specifically around things that they see that they don't think are right. And so that is, I think, just how I'm wired. I grew up in a family of doers. My mom and dad, my brother and I would kind of sneak out in the middle of the night and look down the hall to the living room, and there was a bunch of people there, and we're like, what is this going on? And they had started nonprofits. My mom and dad started I grew up in Tempe, Arizona, and they started the state's first abused women's clinic. abuse clinic there, and they got involved with different things. And so it was a matter of doing things. And my dad had a saying that we grew up with, that when we would go every year. So I grew up right smack dab in the middle of middle class. Like there was no, we didn't always have, I played basketball. That was like my sport. I never had the nicest basketball shoes, but I always had basketball shoes, right? And we didn't take the nicest vacations, but we always took a vacation, and we'd always go camping. And whenever we would go camping, at the end of the camping trip, we'd go to the same campground, hopefully usually get the same campsite. And at the end of the trip, my dad would have my brother and I go around and pick up all the trash in the campground. And my brother and I would always protest and say, that's not our trash. We threw our trash away. And there's cigarette butts. My family didn't smoke. There was just bottle caps and things like that. And we didn't litter. And my dad's comment was, if everybody left the campsite cleaner than when they found it, you wouldn't have a campsite that had trash at all. And that was something that as a kid, it didn't resonate. My brother and I were just pissed off that we had to pick up trash. But later on in life, we reflected back and realized, wow, that was a really valuable lesson, is that if everyone leaves the campsite, quote, the campsite cleaner than when they found it, the campsite, AKA the world, would be a lot better place. So I think that's something that was just ingrained in us really early.
That's amazing. And I have 2 boys myself. And so these are like the type of lessons that I'm looking to take in so that I can figure out how to impart that on them so that they become the kind of people as adults that do something.
Sure.
You sort of touched on this really, but just taking a step back, like I wonder if you do come across adults in your work that ask, well, why is it my responsibility to fix the problems in the world? And how would you respond to that? I mean, like I said, you kind of did touch on it there, but kind of in short, what is it that you think we owe to our fellow human beings?
If someone asked me, it's not my responsibility, why should I do it? I probably wouldn't be in a conversation with them in the first place, right? So I've never encountered that. I feel like the life that we live, every person's life that we have, is a blessed life. And humans are very unique in the animal kingdom in that we are comparative. We have the mental ability, and I won't call it an advantage, but the mental ability to compare ourselves to other members of our species. And for better or for worse, if we really do that and we don't just compare up, where we're looking at what we see in the news or social media and wish that we had that, but also compared, to people who are less fortunate, and looked at their lives, then I think we would all realize that there's always going to be someone who has it worse than us. And there was a story that happened to me. My dad also had cancer, and he was towards the end, but he went to visit his uncle, and he took us with him, and his uncle had diabetes, and he was getting close to the end of his battle with diabetes, and he'd had an amputation, and it had progressed pretty far. And when we got there, my uncle Jim, like as we walked in the door, was like heaving in a bucket, as apparently that's what happens, right? And he's heaving, and he sees us coming in, and he kind of wipes his mouth off and puts the bucket down, and he's laying in a hospital bed in his bedroom, and he said, "Oh my God, it's so good to see you." And he just lit up like a Christmas tree. And we were like, "Oh my," it was so weird. The room had that smell, and watching what he did right when we came in the door, it was just very graphic, but, and it was also all the senses were activated. And my dad came in and was like, "Hey, Jim, da, da, da." And, he said, "Jim, I'm just really, really sorry." And I remember so vividly, I can see his face. He said, "Sorry? What are you sorry for? Don't be sorry." He's like, "Listen, if everybody took the cross that they bore and they threw it out in the middle of the street where everybody else could see it, they would run out and grab their cross before someone else could grab theirs, because they would realize that everyone else's is worse." This was a guy who passed probably a month or two after him saying this. And that always hit me with the fact that as comparative beings, we are so, I I guess, nonsensical in that we don't compare both ways. And so we do the things we compare up in ways that make us feel bad, as opposed to look down and realize how blessed we are. So I feel like it's our duty to take the blessing of our life and just try to make someone's life a little bit better. Because if nothing else, there's a chemical that releases in our body that when that happens, when we do something kind for another person, it is actually stimulating us. It actually gives us this euphoric feeling that that actually helps our health, and it helps who we are as people. So in a way, kind of a secondary way, it's actually good for us. It's good for us. And it's, I wrote about this once I took kind of it was more of a semantical, pursuit of the fact that if you do things that are selfish, quote, selfish, which is typically a bad word, you would do things that are good for you, do things that are just solely good for you. Well, doing good for other people then could be classified as selfish. So to live a, quote, selfish life and doing good for other people is actually the most conventionally altruistic thing you can do. But in my, little semantical fun, it's the most selfish thing you can do.
That really resonates with me, because the times when I am the most sort of like classically self-focused are the times I feel sort of the worst. And the times that I am putting my energy into other people and I'm helping people and I'm volunteering or whatever that is, I feel very light. And there's like a lot of just like positive emotion and things that I get from that. So I can attest to that 100%. And
we don't have, as humans, we lack perspective, right? We, as fish in our little, fish bowl, we only see what we see in our fish bowl, and we don't get a chance to have that. Besides having, news feeds and things that we see on our phones and devices, you don't really have that perspective. And that seems false and so foreign that we don't have the ability to have really, sometimes for a lot of people, it might resonate, but for a lot of people, it doesn't really deeply resonate when they see what's going on in fill in the blank, Sudan or Gaza or where without that perspective, you don't have the ability to live your life within this feeling, this little bubble of feeling like, wow, I really won the lottery. I really, really won the lottery. And I will tell you, my team that's here with me right now, and on Veterans Day, we always go to the VA, which is down the street from us here in Los Angeles. And to a person, every homeless vet that we met, we walked up and we were like, what do you need? Just tell us what you need and we'll get it. To a person, every person was like, I'm good. There's someone else over here, though, that you should help. They were all homeless. We basically had to threaten them and say, listen, we're going to go get you something and you're not going to have a choice in what you get. So you better just vote now or you're going to get whatever we give you. And they would laugh. And we still had to kind of extract it. Right. And I think that perspective is something that it's something that I think I'm very lucky that I get to see on the regular, is watch the truly altruistic and truly giving nature of people who would fall under that category of being, living in unfortunate circumstances, yet their unfortunate circumstances have caused them to be more giving and more benevolent than people who have far greater means.
100%. Yeah. And they're not kind of caught up in any sort of like greed cycle. It's like they're already thinking about what it's like for them and what it's like for somebody else in their position, which is very heartening to hear, the inherent good in humanity. And it's so cool that you get to see that. And I think that you have so many interesting stories and examples and ways that you can illuminate other people to these ideas. So, at Riveo Creative, we are a video marketing company. And so we talk a lot about storytelling and the power of storytelling. Can you talk about the power of storytelling for you and how that intersects with the work that you do?
Sure. I mean, for us, our mission statement is change the world through technology and story. So the work that we do from an innovation standpoint is I think it's remarkable. We do some amazing stuff, but if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? The answer is no. You have to hear it, right? You know, by the way, we can get in a whole debate on that, right? But it's a matter of the person who receives that sound, what they actually do, how they process it. And for us, the stories that we tell, I believe, are more impactful than the actual things that we've created. The iWriter, this thing is so schlocky. I mean, it's duct tape and zip ties and a busted ass camera, and it's just and cheap sunglasses. There's the Daniel arm, and like I'm looking at some of the things on the shelf behind us. It's not that special. There's people making a heck of a lot more special things, but for the fact that we tell powerful stories about it, and those stories, then you hear those stories or see those stories or experience those stories, and it makes you want to actually take and go do something with it. That's where the power comes from. Like, truly, Not Impossible at the end of the day is a storytelling company about the innovations that we make.
Absolutely. Well said. And what's the story of an initiative that you're particularly proud of and focused on right now?
You said you have kids?
I do. Yes.
Yeah. Which one's your favorite?
I plead the fifth. I have a 13-year-old and a 8-year-old.
Oh, I know the answer to that question then. And it depends on the day, but I'm guessing if, this is the end of the year where you get your Spotify report of like what you've listened to for the year. Mm-hmm. I know in your year where it has ranked in days of favorites, but we're not going to say that on live podcast.
Thank you.
I mean, there's a lot of things that we're working on that we're really, really passionate about. I think right now, one of the things that it's very prevalent right now is an initiative that we launched we double clicked and really put a lot of effort into fortifying the launch of it during the pandemic, which is a company called Hunger Not Impossible, which has evolved into a company called Bento. And Bento is based on the absurdity that there are 50 million people in this country who are food insecure. I kind of talked about it before. And those people are people who are not begging on the street. Those people are driving hard. They're working hard. They're grinding. They're trying to get ahead in life, but they can't because they are limited in terms of how much money they're able to make because it's like this never ending cycle. And so then they end up eating crap food. That crap food makes them unhealthy. And it's just this constant never ending cycle that's hard to escape from. And so Bento was launched during the pandemic. And the basis of it is super, super simple, is that every single food product that you or I have access to right now has a digital signature, either through DoorDash or Grubhub or Uber Eats or through Albertsons or Kroger or, Walmart. There's a digital signature to that. And we said, well, what if we were to take those digital signatures, bring them in-house, leverage the brand of Not Impossible so we got access to those digital signatures and those UPC codes, and then create a way for people who were food insecure to be able to create a digital transaction where they were able to pick food that was curated for them for their particular situation. So let's say that they were kosher, gluten-free, lactose intolerant, and I don't know, pescatarian. Like, that's a really, really difficult dinner guest to invite to your house, but that's just algorithmically, those are just nodes within the decisioning process. And so we made it so that someone could go through and actually select food that was curated around their particular situation, and that the transaction happened on the back end, the financial transaction happened on the back end through a company that was, quote, sponsored them or was responsible. So during the pandemic, we had charities like Boys and Girls Club and YMCA and things like that. Later on, we evolved to working with healthcare systems, and big healthcare systems have a vested interest in making sure, especially looking at people who are on Medicaid, and keeping those people healthy. And what I'm really proud of is that we've taken this concept of creating easy, simple, and dignified access to food, and we've actually figured out a flywheel where the feeding of somebody isn't, bleeding heart liberal. It is actually, it's this perfect representation of stimulating the local economies because we draw on the food from local grocery stores, and we're taking care of our most our most desperate and most unfortunate people who need that. And what that does is it elevates them from this layer of panic, this layer of instability, to now they have a platform of stability to feed their family and actually think about, okay, I'm going to get a better job, or I'm going to go to school, and I can actually think about more than 24-hour periods about just making sure that I get food. And that, to me, I think is, we last quarter, we were averaging about 40,000 grocery orders per month delivered to doorsteps of people that needed it. And the beautiful thing about that is not only was it changing people's health, we watched A1C levels drop, we watched different, different kind of factors that we can measure around people's health. We watched those things get better, but it also stimulated the local economy, which, by the way, employed a lot of those same people. So you created this wonderful flywheel. And for us, that's really about one of the core functionalities that we develop when we're working on projects for ourselves, or if we're working for other entities, is this concept called frictionless innovation, of how do you create solutions where you're not asking the system to adapt or change their behavior, just change the way that they operate, but instead you're asking them to just continue to behave the way that they always behave. So one of the beautiful things about Bento is that the people who pick the groceries, the people who deliver the groceries, have no idea that they're delivering it to people who are food insecure. It's just another order. So they haven't had to change any behavior whatsoever at all in doing the good that we're doing.
That's incredible. And it's funny that this is the initiative that we're talking about, because as I was preparing for this episode and looking into everything that Not Impossible Labs does, I was thinking, okay, what's something that I feel like is an impossible problem, and how would I even go about thinking about how to solve this? And food insecurity was one of the top things, of course, that came up in my mind. And I'm like, I wouldn't even know where to start. But that's something that you're like, yeah, we see that problem and we found out something to do about it. And that's really amazing.
Well, and part of look, just we're like, I'm going to jump headfirst off this pedestal that you're putting me on right now. The way that we get to these conclusions is through this principle that we call help one, help many. In that we didn't start by trying to serve 40,000 grocery orders per month. We started by working with a couple kids in the local Venice area with a group called Safe Place for Youth. And we had a theory of what might work, and we tested it and it worked. And then it just kind of grew and grew and grew from there. But our whole thing is, if you start by helping one person and solving the problem, that absurdity for that one person, and then telling the story of that one person, that can lead you to being able to do it at scale. But in the end, and this is something that I say all the time, if everybody in this world, if half the people in this world decided tomorrow to help one person, the whole world would be helped, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's really about starting small. I think for the regular person that doesn't have an unlimited bank account, that doesn't have unlimited resources, I think we can start small. And in doing so, that gives us the ability to do more, because we start to believe in ourselves. And we also start to see the impact that just by helping a few people, one person really makes in their life.
Yeah. And that's actually gets into something I was going to ask you about, which is, a lot of our audience are small business owners or entrepreneurs, or people that want to use their business to get into the world of social good. But seeing the scale at which you're able to do these things now might feel intimidating. But, like you said, a key part of that philosophy is you can change humanity by changing just one life. How do you think that philosophy, or that way of helping people might apply to a small business, for example, who has a little bit more resources than an individual person, but doesn't quite know where to start?
I mean, you have to start with what really moves you and what you're passionate about, because so many times people will start down a path and it gets tough, and then they pull up and they don't want to do it. So sticking with something that you're very passionate about, I think, is really important. And I would say having, being a son to a small business owners or to two small business owners and ourselves kind of doing this throughout the year, having different sizes of businesses. I think it's just about focus and about really understanding what it is one that drives your own internal happiness, because that can be the thing that you really, really lean on when times get tough, when things get hard, when you lose an account or all of a sudden your code doesn't work the way you thought it would, or whatever it might be. If you have a passion around what you're doing, it gives you the ability to carry on. And then being able to see, back to the help one, help many thing, being able to study what works in those smaller groups, so that in smaller either entities or initiatives or deployments, that you can actually see what works and then figure out how and if you might be able to scale it bigger. So, I mean, my advice with anyone who is in a small business is like, keep on keeping on. It's never going to be easy, but if it's fun and not easy, then it makes it a whole lot easier to carry on.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. That's the kind of advice you get for, even things just like working out. Do something that you enjoy, because it's hard. It's going to be hard. But if you're doing something fun, you will keep doing it and you will keep going back to it. So that's great advice. And when you're working in the realm of something like making the impossible possible, which is essentially what Not Impossible Labs is doing, how do you set a clear course for the future of the company? And what does that future look like to you at this point?
I mean, our course is we're very myopic in terms of we see what we need to do and we go do it for that particular project. And, we were born out of production. So it's wired in us to have a production, have a deadline, work towards that deadline, complete, go have some beers to celebrate it, and wake up the next day and start on the next project. So we're very much a project-driven company, which I think is really fun because you get a chance to see completion. You get a chance to start and complete something. And in terms of the strategy of the company, we have things and ideas of things that we're going to continue to do and how we're going to continue to evolve and grow as Not Impossible Labs. And if we keep our head down and make sure that everything that we tackle, which is not always successful, but we put everything we can into, one, trying to achieve it, and two, trying to tell that story powerfully, then that in and of itself is a strategy that allows us to continue on.
Yeah. Beautiful. And if you're thinking like, decades from now, you're looking back on the company, you're looking back on all of this investment that you've put here, what to you will have made it all worth it?
It's kind of already worth it. I don't think I need 10 years to look back and do it. I think that the legacy of what we've done is already there. If all of a sudden there's like a knock at the door and it's God and he or she says that they want their key card back because we got the wrong hotel room and we're in a different room, I'd be like, well, I knew it. I knew this life wasn't supposed to be mine. It's supposed to be someone else's. So I think I feel really good about what we've created thus far. 10 years from now, I would say, my one wish would be that we're continuing on. I don't want Not Impossible to be the Mick Ebeling story. I want it to be the Not Impossible story. So building something that has the ability to carry on beyond who I am and beyond, and carry on the legacy of what we love to do, which is to go out and create technology for the sake of humanity. That's something that I really want to see happen.
Well, you are definitely already doing that work that is worth it and to be proud of. It's very clear, and you are all very powerful storytellers. Just watching the films that you've created that tell these stories, and it's because also you're telling the people are powerful people. And earlier you used the word dignified, and I think that's another piece of this is that it is very clear that you see the people that you're helping with a lot of dignity, and that's part of this experience is seeing the dignity in humanity and helping them from that perspective, and not from a, better than perspective. It's from lifting someone up because of their inherent value and worth as a human being, which is really beautiful. I just have one more question for you, and then I'll ask where people can find you. But we ask all of our guests at the Riveo Impact Lab, what does the word impact mean to you?
Impact conventionally has to do with what you do to others. It impacts others, which I think is great, that people think about the impact that this is going to have on an industry, on a society, on a disease, on a whatever it might be. There's an impact that happens to something. I think that what I've learned over the course of Not Impossible is that the things that we deploy, the things that we have created, the things that we've released have impact on other people. But it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. The impact that it has on us is the same, if not greater, in my opinion. And there's no way to measure that. But I feel like the impact is about doing the things that you love and doing the things that you love in a way that somehow could contribute to other people. But therein lies that flywheel where you're doing it and you're doing it for yourself, but you're doing it for other people, which you're doing it for yourself and you're doing it for other people. And I think that to me, I think is probably the best way to, in my opinion, put on the spot right now. That would be the way I would describe impact.
I think that is a beautiful way to wrap up this discussion and what we've talked about, and that frictionless impact yourself, impact others. It all comes back to that. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Where can people find you and follow the work that you and Not Impossible is doing?
So you can go to notimpossible.com and see all the things that we're working on, and then follow us on all the social media channels and stations and highways and byways. We're everywhere. So on IG and LinkedIn and anything else, it's at Not Impossible Labs.
Perfect. Well, we will direct everyone to follow you all as they should. You're doing incredible work, and I'm excited to see where you all go next. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Our Make an Impact tip of the month: identify a human problem that feels completely unacceptable to you and take one small step to change it. For example, if food insecurity seems absurd, start by connecting with local groups serving meals to neighbors in need. Thanks for listening, and make sure to do good in the world this month. If you have questions you'd like us to address on the podcast, you can reach us at info@riveocreative.com. Subscribe wherever you listen so you don't miss out on any of our incredible upcoming guests. We'll see you soon at the Riveo Impact Lab.